Hello. What you've just seen are the garage codes from the sides of London buses. Now, not every London bus carries a garage code. Some bus companies don't really bother with them, but every London bus has a garage. And sometimes buses move from one garage to another. If we look back to the days of London transport, when London's buses were all state-owned and highly standardised, buses were constantly on the move because of London Transport's maintenance regime. Every 4 years, buses were booked in for a complete body and chassis overhaul, usually at Alden Works, and when they were finished, they didn't always go back to the garage they first came from. With privatisation, everything changed. Buses still move around, but the moves are driven by different factors. Transport for London calls the shots when it comes to deciding the specification of vehicles used on London bus services. When a contract is renewed or passed to a new operator, TfL decides whether to allow the use of existing vehicles or to call for new vehicles. In recent times, various factors have hastened calls for new vehicles, for example the expansion of low emission zones and the policy to move towards 100% electric or hydrogen powered vehicles. These factors mean that operators often have to remove vehicles from frontline service well before the end of their service lives. Sometimes they can be cascaded to other parts of the network, replacing older time-expired vehicles in the process. Sometimes they can be shipped off to another part of the country for further use. Big combines like Stagecoach, Go Ahead and Arriva have scope to do this. Otherwise, they just have to be sold or returned to the leasing company. There's another reason why London's buses have been moved around a lot over the last 10 years, and that's to do with the new route master. But that's a topic I'm going to come back to a bit later on. So, when I was looking back through the thousands of film clips that I've taken of London buses over the last 7 years, it struck me that I was sometimes coming across vehicles that I had previously filmed in a different location and on a different route. And I thought it would be fun to put some of them together to show some examples of how London's buses get shunted around between garages and between operators. What became DLA 621 was a member of a large batch of Transbus-bodied DAF DB250s delivered in January 2003 for the conversion of Route 142 to low floor. When Arriva the Shires won the contract for the 258 from First Centre West in early 2006, these buses were also used on that route as well as the 340. After the restructuring of Arriva London in 2016, these buses started to be replaced by slightly newer vehicles, and this bus was eventually stood down in July. In autumn 2016, it joined the training fleet at Enfield and is seen in 2020 sporting a new coat of paint. By the summer of 2021, it was in store at Beddington Farm, where it was among half a dozen vehicles which were vandalised.
Well, I thought the 22
DW190 was a much newer Garston vehicle that was delivered in 2009 and used principally on the 258. It hung on until the 258 and the 142 were both lost to London Sovereign in September 2017, and a few weeks later it reappeared at Croydon, where it works regularly on all the double-deck routes from that garage. VLW 193 was new in August 2003 and was one of a number of B7TLs delivered to Tottenham for the 76, which was newly acquired from First Capital. In November 2010 they were replaced by Gemini 2 hybrids and were transferred to Stamford Hill, where they were used on the 253. In June 2015 they were again replaced by hybrids, and VLW 193 went to Wood Green, where it spent its last couple of years working the 144 and the 221 before being sold to B&H Travel of Huddersfield and converted to single door. This is one of the fleet of short single-door Enviro 200s that were required to replace Dennis Darts upon the renewal of the 192 contract in November 2007. Although the 192 was lost to Go Ahead in November 2014, these buses were loaned to Go Ahead and they kept working the route until Go Ahead's new streetlights could be delivered early the following year. In April 2015, some of them were transferred to Edmonton to work the 382, but that route was lost to Metroline in July 2017 and they were put into store. This bus reappeared 2 years later at Enfield, where it continues to work the 318. Arriva bought its first Enviro 400s in 2008, and this is one of the first batch allocated to Palmer's Green in March for the contract renewal of the 102. The E400s were replaced on the 102 by Volvo hybrids in October 2019, and this one was shipped south of the river to work the 64, the 198 and the 250 at Thornton Heath. The next three vehicles are Gemini 2 DLs, which were required to help convert the 38 from articulated Mercedes to double-decker in autumn 2009. They were allocated to Clapton and also used on the 242 after that route was moved there from Stamford Hill. From May 2014, the 38 was converted to new route masters and the Geminis focused on the 242 until replaced by new hybrid Volvos in 2017. At this point they moved out east to take up residence at Grays, where they worked the 66, the 103 and the 370. Further to the Gemini 2DLs that we've just seen, here are two E400s that also started out at Clapton as replacements for Arctics on the 38 in late 2009. These ones later moved to Ash Grove to take up duties on the 78, 168 and 254, and they stayed there until the autumn of 2015 when they moved out to Barking. Barking was their home for 5 years, but in 2020 they moved to Dartford, where they continue to work all the double-deck routes from that garage. Next we have two of the Gemini 2DLs allocated to Tottenham in the autumn of 2010 for the replacement of Arctics on the 149. They worked on this and other Tottenham routes, like the 243 and the 341, until October 2017, by which time they had been largely superseded by new route masters and hybrid Volvos. Between October and November 2017, they decamped to Croydon, where they now work routes 60, 194, 264, 412 and 466. The next bus was delivered new to Clapton in June 2011, where it worked the 38 and the 242 until being moved to Tottenham in February 2013. It spent 2.5 years at Tottenham until new route masters started to move in for the 149 conversion, and it was redeployed to Enfield in October 2015 for the renewal of the 349 contract. DW423 moved on again in January 2018, this time to Dartford, where we see it on the 99. The next two Gemini 2DLs were from the batch allocated to Stamford Hill in September 2011 to help replace Arctics on the 73. They worked the 73 and the 253, but in December 2012 the 73 was converted to hybrid Volvos, so both buses were promptly moved to Tottenham. DW454 was out of service for a few months, then both vehicles went off to Dartford in January 2018. Other vehicles allocated to Stamford Hill to replace Arctics in September 2011 were 20 hybrid Volvo B5LHs. Unlike the DWs, they stayed there for a few years until they were replaced by new Routemasters in September 2016. This prompted a move to Brixton to replace DWs on the 59 and the 319. They're still at Brixton, but nowadays just work the 50 and the 133. Like the two before, this hybrid also started off at Stamford Hill, but when it was made redundant in 2016 it went instead to Tottenham, where it worked for 4 years before being moved to Dartford for the 301 and the 335 in October 2020. The first 8 examples of Arriva's ENX class of 10.8 metre E200s were allocated to Enfield for the 313 in October 2011. After they were displaced by new Routemasters in October 2020, they were soon on the move. The first 2 you'll see went to Dartford for a couple of months and ended up at Croydon working the 166. The third one you'll see went straight from Enfield to Thornton Heath, where it works alongside other members of the ENX class on the 289. Here are 2 of the 14 9.6 metre E200s that were delivered in June 2012 to Lee Valley Garage for the 397 and the W11 routes, which Arriva had acquired a few months previously. In March 2014, Lee Valley Garage was closed and the allocation was transferred to Edmonton. Both the 397 and the W11 passed to CT Plus in spring 2017, and the buses were transferred to Thornton Heath for the 410 route, which they continue to work alongside Wright's streetlights. The 73 had been converted to double-deck operation in September 2011, using a mix of hybrid and diesel buses. And in December 2012, a further 27 hybrids were allocated to Stamford Hill to complete the conversion to hybrid power. This member of the batch stayed there until first the 73, then the 253 were converted to new route masters. Then it moved to Tottenham for 2.5 years, followed by a year at Wood Green on the 29, 144 and 221. In September 2020, it went off to Dartford to work the 301 and the 335. Next we have a diesel Gemini that was bought for the acquisition of the 106 route from Stagecoach in April 2013. It worked out of Ash Grove until June 2020 when the 106 was lost to Go Ahead London. The DWs displaced from Ash Grove were moved to Enfield, where they joined with other similar vehicles to form a common user pool for routes 121, 191 and 349. This bus is one of 20 Gemini 2 DLs that were delivered to Tottenham in 2013 for the acquisition of the 67 route from London General, but it only stayed there for a month before moving to Ash Grove to reinforce the batch of similar buses working the 106. In January 2018, this bus began an 8-month stint at Wood Green before moving to Dartford for nearly 2 years. However, in April 2020, it returned north of the Thames, commencing a residency at Enfield. Here are 3 more of the Tottenham allocation of DWs for the 67. They were delivered in May 2013 and put in a solid 7 years of service at Tottenham, but from 2017 onwards they were being systematically replaced by Volvo hybrids. The last straw was the loss of the 230 to Go Ahead in June 2020, and between June and August they were gradually shipped down south to Croydon. This is one of a batch of MCV-bodied Dennis Darts that was bought new in 2006 by Docklands Buses at about the same time the company was acquired by the Go Ahead Group. The W19 was transferred to Blue Triangle in May 2011, and this bus worked the route out of Rainham Garage, then River Road, until the contract for the W19 was lost to CT Plus in November 2016. This bus was used on other duties until it was stood down in March 2017. It was later acquired by Mullineys of Watford, who used it on their Watford town service, the 318, which was originally started up by Metro Line, hence the colour scheme. Next, one of a batch of E400s bought by First Capital in 2008 for the newly acquired 191 and 231 contracts, which it worked out of Northumberland Park Garage. In March 2012, the garage and all of its routes were sold to the Go Ahead Group. In June 2018, the 231 was lost to Metro Line, and in June 2020, the 191 was lost to Arriva, and these buses became redundant. EN2 gained a new lease of life when it was refurbished, fitted with electronic destination displays, and joined the commercial services fleet. The 575 was a non-TfL route which started running between Romford and Harlow in the mid-1990s and came to an end in August 2021. Here are two more ex-First Capital vehicles. These 9.6 metre E200s were from a batch of 9 delivered to Northumberland Park in February 2012 for the W16 route, which First had just acquired from Arriva. A month later, ownership passed to the Go-Ahead Group. They continued to work both the W16 and the 299 until March 2017, when the W16 was lost to CT+. They then transferred to Metrobus at Orpington and continued to work the R11. Delivered at the same time was WVL 495, which was the last of the batch of 15 Volvos allocated to Stockwell for a new contract on the 19, which had just been taken over from Arriva. In March 2015, part of the allocation was moved to Northumberland Park, and in April 2017, when the 19 passed back to Arriva, this bus carried on serving other Northumberland Park routes until August 2017, when it moved to River Road to focus primarily on Service 5. E276 was a single E40D allocated to Northumberland Park in May 2013 for a renewal of the 231 contract. After the loss of the 231 in June 2018, it carried on running the 191 until November, when it was moved to Blue Triangle at River Road to concentrate on the 104, which was about to be taken over from Stagecoach. This streetlight WF was one of 16 delivered to Northumberland Park for the 192 route in 2015. It worked there until November 2019, when the contract passed back to Arriva. It was transferred straight away to Metrobus at Orpington and has since worked there on routes 352, R3 and R7. You will notice that it's been given a new front panel at some stage and has lost its right bus emblem. The following three buses are members of a batch of 43 10.2 metre E200s delivered to London Sovereign in 2011. These were based at Harrow, and until 2018 they were used variously on the 223, the 398 and the H17. Because of the influx of new vehicles connected with the acquisition of the H18 and 19 and the 224 contracts in the autumn of 2018, enough spare E200s were around to transfer some of them to Shepherd's Bush to replace London United's last Dennis Darts, which had been making their last stand on Route 72. Here's another London Sovereign vehicle that also transferred to Shepherd's Bush in December 2018. In May 2019, Shepherd's Bush Garage put on some extra journeys on Tolworth's 265 route, and these lasted about 4 months. Afterwards, this bus was dispatched back to Harrow from whence it had originally come. In May 2014, Quality Line, which was a subsidiary of London United, took delivery of 13 Optare Metro City 9.9 metre buses for a new contract on its route S1, which was based at its Epsom garage. When Quality Line lost the contract for the S1 in July 2021, the route and the vehicles were taken over by Metrobus, which now runs the service from its Croydon premises. The only outward sign of any change is the new sign writing on the buses and the change of fleet number. In July 2021, to cover for the non-availability of one of the metro cities, London United supplied a standard Enviro 200 on loan to the Go-Ahead Group. This received the fleet number OM1. It is first seen working in normal duty on the 423 out of Hounslow Heath in 2019, then in the hands of Metrobus on the S1. After 3 months at Croydon, this bus returned to London United and now operates out of Fulwell. TE829 was one of a batch of Enviro 400s bought new for the inauguration of Service 332 in October 2007. In 2012 it moved up the road from Cricklewood to Edgware, where it worked all the principal double-deck routes. It spent 5 years at Edgware before moving back to Cricklewood in July 2017, and from November 2018 it worked almost exclusively on the 210 route. It was withdrawn from service in May 2020. This bus was delivered to Cricklewood in 2010 to replace Plaxton President-bodied Dennis Tridents on the 139. It worked at Cricklewood for 5 years before being moved to Holloway, where it appeared mostly on the 91 and the 271. After that it did 3 more years at Cricklewood before being retired to Potters Bar in June 2020. Now, 2 more E400s, which started out at Cricklewood in 2010. 5 years on, these 2 were sent to Potters Bar in December 2015 to replace Dennis Tridents and stayed there for 2 years before moving on to Edgware in July 2017. In October 2018 they were transferred with the 204 allocation to Alperton, but they moved back again when Alperton Garage closed in September 2021. The next two buses were from a batch of Enviro 400 hybrids delivered to Cricklewood at the end of 2011, nominally replacing diesel E400s on the 139 service, but in practice ending up working all sorts of routes from that garage. After the 139 was lost to London Sovereign in April 2017, they stayed on general duties at Cricklewood before moving up the road to Edgware, where both of them still remain. This was one of a batch of 34 Gemini 3-bodied Volvo hybrids, which went initially to Willesden for the 6 and the 98. After a few weeks at Willesden Junction covering the 295, it moved to Potters Bar in December 2015 to work the 307, which was newly gained from Arriva. In practice, it divided its time between the 307 and the 34, with occasional appearances on the 125. In August 2017 it was on the move again, this time to Holloway, where it presently covers the 4, 17, 91 and 271. Another bus that started off at Willesden was this BYD battery bus with Chinese-built body and chassis, one of 5 delivered to Metroline in 2016. These buses served on the 98 route until October 2019, when they were stood down and eventually sold to Uno, which is a commercial offshoot of the University of Hertfordshire. Uno started using them on the TfL school services 692 and 699 with effect from November 2020. This bus was part of a batch of 12 new E40Ds allocated to Leighton for the acquisition of Route 179 in September 2013, although in practice it worked all the double-deck routes at Leighton, including the 275. In September 2018, the 179 route and vehicles were moved from Leighton to Barking. After a while, this vehicle started wandering occasionally onto the 62 and the 145. This was Stagecoach's first E40H hybrid, one of a batch of 26 delivered to Bow in early 2012 for the conversion of Service 15. By 2014, this bus was also making sporadic appearances on the 205, which continued until March 2015 when it was moved from Bow to Leighton, where it works the 56 and occasionally the 215. Next up is one of 30 buses in the second 2014 delivery of E40H hybrids, which were mostly allocated to Plumstead for the hybridisation of the 53 and the 122. This one was there for nearly 5 years before moving to Bow in April 2019, and you'll see it on the 205. It stayed at Bow until February 2021 when it moved back home to Plumstead. The following two vehicles were delivered in summer 2009 for the newly acquired 51 service running from Plumstead, although they were also used on the 96 and the 177. In 2014 they were replaced by Gemini 3-bodied Volvo hybrids, and they were stored for a month or two before reappearing at West Ham as part of a batch of 23 Scanias intended to replace Dennis Tridents on renewed contracts for the 262 and the 473. They stayed at West Ham until March 2019, when they both went back to Plumstead, where they are now used as logistical spares. The following two buses are part of a batch of 28 Scanias delivered in the summer of 2009, all but 4 of which went to Bow. At Bow they operated on the 8, the 205 and the 277. New route masters took over the 8 from June 2014, so they were limited to the 205 and the 277. When the 277 gained new hybrid E40Hs in 2017, the Scanias were shunted off to pastures new. The first one you'll see went to West Ham and the second went to Plumstead. one of the batch of 14 E400s allocated to Plumstead in spring 2011 for a new contract on Service 99. Nowadays it's back at Plumstead, but it spent just over 3 years at West Ham between 2014 and 2019 and 11 months at Barking between 2020 and 2021. This bus, new in April 2011, was one of a batch of diesel-powered E400s allocated to Barking to replace Dennis Trident's on the 145, after which it spent 5 years at Romford, starting in April 2016. In April 2021, it was cascaded to Plumstead. Like the last bus, this one served at Barking from New in 2011, being part of an allocation to Route 387. In February 2017, it was moved to Leighton, where it currently resides. Now, one of 12 E40Ds allocated to Barking in March 2012 for the 101. It worked principally on the 101 and occasionally the 169 until the 101 was lost to Blue Triangle in March 2017. It carried on running the 5, 15 and 145 until July, when it moved south of the Thames to Bromley for use on the 61 and the 261. The next 3 buses were allocated from New to West Ham for routes 104 and 158 in March 2012. They worked both these routes, plus the 238 and the 474, until December 2018, when they moved on to Plumstead for the 96, 422 and 472. This is another one of the 104-158 batch of E40Ds allocated to West Ham in March 2012. It stayed for a few months longer than the others before finally being transferred to Leighton in March 2019. It currently works the 215 and the 275. Here are two buses from the batch of 25 10.8 metre Enviro 200s delivered new to Rainham in summer 2013 for the 165 and 256. In October 2018 they were replaced on the 165 by Enviro 200 MMCs, and in early 2021 the 256 was converted to double deck. A handful of the redundant E200s were moved to Bromley to replace the 10.2 metre Enviros that had been working on route 246 since it was taken over from Metrobus in September 2020. The 246 has a peak vehicle requirement of 4 vehicles. This was one of 16 single-deckers delivered to First Capital in April 2012 to work route 236 from Lee Interchange Garage. They also worked a variety of other routes including the 308, 488, RV1 and W14. They were replaced on the 236 by Streetlight DFs in April 2017, and this, coupled with an influx of new double-deckers for the 308, meant that some of the E200s could be disposed of. By the following year, this bus had turned up in the hands of Centrebus, working in Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire. Next up is one of 12 First Group E40Ds allocated to Centre West at Westbourne Park for the 23 in summer 2012. It worked mostly on the 23 until 2016 when it was replaced by Gemini-bodied Volvos. It went to Lee Interchange and worked there for 18 months on the 30, 69, 212 and 425 before being stood down and disposed of in 2017 when it was only 5 years old. It was acquired by Sullivan's, mostly for schoolwork, but also appears regularly as a spare on the 217 and the 298. Westbourne Park received 33 Gemini 2-bodied Volvo B9TLs for Route 23 in January 2012. These worked variously on the 18, the 23 and the 266 until Tower Transit lost the contract for Route 266 in July 2017 and 27 of the Volvos were stood down. Arriva subsequently leased 10 of them via the dealer Ensign and numbered them VLW 901 to 910. They replaced ALX-bodied Volvo B7TLs on the 123 from Edmonton Garage in January 2018 and remained on the 123 until March 2019 when they moved on to the newly acquired 158, which they served until October 2021, at which point their lease came to an end. As I said at the beginning, there was another reason why London's buses have been moved around a lot over the last 10 years, and it's to do with London Mayor Boris Johnson's New Bus for London project, or the New Routemaster as it eventually became known. Having set the wheels in motion to build up to 1,000 of the new buses, Transport for London was faced with the dilemma of how to get London bus companies to adopt them. After all, they were going to be eye-wateringly expensive and very difficult to find new uses for when they were older. The compromise arrived at was that Transport for London, through its London Buses Limited subsidiary, would purchase and retain ownership of the new buses, and when letting a contract that required them, would supply the vehicles as well, which is what it did with the original Routemasters back in the 1990s. Now, you may already have gathered that the farming out of 1,000 new three-door hybrids sent a tidal wave through the London bus fleet and caused a great many nearly new vehicles to be prematurely cascaded away from central London operation. Remember, these were buses which had only recently been drafted in to help replace the bendy buses. As for the new Routemasters themselves, many of them have moved around. Competitive tendering has already seen a lot of them shunted from one operator's garage to another, and in the next section we'll see some of the buses that haven't stayed where they were first put. LT37 is from the consignment of 32 new Routemasters delivered to Holloway in June 2013 for the conversion of the 24 route. It worked the 24 and subsequently also the 390 until Metroline lost the 24 service to Abellio in November 2019. It moved with its sisters to Battersea, where it's in a pool that services not only the 24 but also the 27, the 159 and the 415. The next bus is from the batch of 26 that was delivered to London United for Service 9 in October 2013. At Stamford Brook it worked the 9 and also the 10, which was cancelled in 2018, and its vehicles were moved on to the 27. In November 2019 the 27 route and an equivalent number of vehicles passed under tendering to Abellio, who operated them from Battersea in a pool that also included the 24, the 27 and the 159. As a consequence of the 2021 service reductions, this bus was sent back to London United to use on the 111 and the H32, and it will be interesting to see what happens to it when Abellio acquire the 111 service in April 2022. LT150 was part of the January 2014 delivery to London United for the conversion of Route 10. In November 2017 the 267 was due to be converted using the last new route masters to be built, and LT150 was one of two older vehicles sent on in advance to Fulwell to help with driver familiarisation. As it happened, it ended up staying there and consequently got roped in when the 267 and all its buses were transferred to Abellio in November 2019. Abellio obviously didn't want it at Fulwell and shunted it off to Battersea, where it worked on the 24, 27 and 159. But that wasn't the end of the story. In August 2021 it returned to London United and, like the previous bus, is now a regular performer on the 111 and the H32. LT151 was another of the 2014 batch for the 10 service and which also worked on Service 9. The allocation of buses for the 10 moved to the 27 in early 2019, and in December 2019 this bus moved to Abellio with the transfer of the 27 route. It worked in the common user pool at Battersea until August 2021 when, like the previous two buses, it was declared surplus to requirements and shipped off to Hounslow. The next two buses both tell a similar story. Both of them were allocated to Stamford Brook for Service 10 in 2014, and they both worked variously on the 9, 10, 27 and later on the 211 until November 2019 when a whole squadron of them, actually 27 buses in total, transferred with the 27 service to Abellio. They are now based at Battersea and work on all the new route master services from that garage, namely the 24, 27, 159 and 415. The next bus was from the huge batch of 63 new route masters allocated to Arriva for the 38 in spring 2014, when they replaced Gemini 2-bodied DB300s. They worked exclusively on the 38 right up until October 2020, when service levels were cut because of the epidemic, and 10 new route masters were suddenly surplus to requirements. After a bit of head-scratching, TfL and Arriva came up with the idea of putting them on the 313, which has a peak vehicle requirement of 8 buses, and in many respects is just about as far as you can possibly get from Piccadilly Circus. Next, we have one of 21 vehicles delivered to London Central's Camberwell garage for the 68 in February 2016. The whole batch of 27 vehicles moved to Walworth when Abellio took over the 68 in March 2018. Now, when the 211 contract passed from Abellio to London United in June 2019, instead of sending Stamford Brook the batch of vehicles officially allocated to the 211, Abellio sent the older batch that it had inherited with the 68 the year before, including this one. It now spreads its time between the 211 and the 9. The last 3 new route masters that we'll see are some of the last to be built. They were from a batch of 17 allocated to London United for the 267 in late 2017, and they entered service in December. London United's contract only had 2 years left to run, and when the service was re-tendered, it went to Abellio. In November 2019, the buses all changed garage, but they didn't have far to go. They moved round the corner from London United's part of Fulwell Garage to Abellio's part of Fulwell Garage. So really this only just qualifies as a garage move.